It is impossible to consider either the pandemic treaty or the amendments to the international health regulations in isolation. They are two linked instruments of the WHO, and they need to be considered in parallel. And my opening question, is why does the WHO make false claims regarding proposals to seize states' sovereignty?
The only debates we had in the UK about the WHO pandemic preparedness treaty and amendments to international health regulations were brought about by public petition. If it had been up to Parliament, we wouldn't have had any debates about them whatsoever. It took me 9 months to get a debate on excess deaths. I put in every week for 9 months, and it kept coming back unsuccessful in ballot. And I had to basically threaten the Speaker of the House of Commons with a documentary about thalidomide, where the judges decided in the end that debate in the House of Commons had been suppressed for 11 years on thalidomide and its side effects. And I sent it to the Speaker, the current Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, and said, we wouldn't want history to repeat itself, would we, Lindsay? And then he found me a debate within 3 weeks. And I'd had 26 failed attempts to get a debate on excess deaths, which were affecting everybody in the country all the time, every community. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Whenever they don't want to talk about something, it's because it's just too sensitive for them. It's bound to be true.
What about the mRNA injection? Has very high quantities of DNA in it. This massively increases the risks of disturbing a patient's own DNA. Worse still, the DNA that was injected contains sequences that were hidden from the regulator. This is the SV40, or simian virus 40, promoter region, which has been linked to cancer and has been found in the Pfizer vaccines. This was no accident, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yet again, crucial information was hidden with absolute impunity from the regulator and from the public. And an independent study in Japan, published last week, has found links between increased cancer rates in Japan and those who took the first and subsequent booster vaccines. Perhaps, Madam Deputy Speaker, that explains why Pfizer acquired a cancer treatment company for a reported $43 billion earlier this year. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear, the evidence is clear, these vaccines have caused deaths. And despite this, they've been described as safe and effective. It's time to take the politics out of our science, and we need to put some actual science back into our politics. And given the evidence, Madam Deputy Speaker, I call on the government once again to immediately suspend the use of all mRNA treatments in both humans and animals, pending the outcome of that inquiry.
No. We would have to clear the gallery if clapping continues.
What about the Metropolitan Police response to Mark Sexton's case?
What we found out, Ian Clayton and his team have done some great work. He's a solicitor, a retired solicitor. They've uncovered through freedom of information that all police forces in the country during the pandemic were issued with instructions from something called Operation Talla, Talla, which said that no allegations of crimes relating to the pandemic response and the vaccines were to be investigated by the police. So all of these times when people have gone in with evidence to police stations, they were never going to be investigated. And that also explains why when I wrote to Sir Mark Rowley, the head of Metropolitan Police, when I was an MP twice, he would never meet me, and a number of individuals who wanted to give evidence of crimes against humanity committed during the pandemic and the vaccine rollout. He never met with us.
And what was his reason for not meeting you?
He didn't really give one. Wow. And that was when I was writing to him on MP letterheaded notepaper. But he had the perfect get out because Operation Talla is in operation, and that says that the police are not to investigate any allegations of crimes relating to the pandemic. So we've got suspension of the rule of law and justice.
So who issued that?
Well, it would have come out of the Cabinet Office. They run all the civil servants and all the people who work for the state, and it must have been issued from number 10. If there wasn't anything any wrongdoing going on, you wouldn't need to issue that, would you?
That's exactly my thought.
It's a bit like, if the vaccines were safe and effective, you wouldn't need to ban any, double-blind placebo tests of them to make sure and demonstrate how safe and effective they are. Yeah, see, it's only lies that need protecting. The truth doesn't really need protecting, does it?
No.
It's just there. It's there.
Common sense. It's no longer common anymore.
Well, it's certainly not very common in the House of Commons, I can tell you.
What has become common in the House of Commons?
Well, you're supposed to be able to speak without fear or favour, and I can assure you there's a lot of fear, a lot of favour. They offered me in January 2022, they offered me anything I wanted to sell the people out and shut up. They came to me and said, you can have anything you want, just tell us what you want.
When you say they...
Very senior people from Number 10, but they were operating on behalf of others. But they said, what do you want? I mean, what do you mean, what do I want? I said, well, you tell us what you want and we get it for you. Oh, right. I said, is that the game we're playing? And they said, yeah, that's the game we're playing. Oh. I said, well, in that case, then I want the Prime Minister's resignation letter. Can I have that? That's the game we're playing. They said I couldn't have that. And I said, I didn't really want anything else if that was the game we're playing.
Thought they said anything.
Yeah, but not the Prime Minister's resignation letter. But it's above his pay grade. I mean, it's well above the Prime Minister.
Okay.
I mean, you've got to realise that you don't really think that Keir Starmer's running the country, do you?
Oh, no.
Or thought that Rishi Sunak was running the country, or
No.
Boris Johnson, or Theresa May. Yeah, no, they're not.
It's obvious to me, but to hear it from you as well.
I didn't realise until the pandemic, when nothing added up, and the bribe, obviously the attempted bribe. It was the response of my colleagues in Parliament that shocked me the most. They just they knew, even in 2022, they knew that the vaccines weren't safe and effective when I explained it to them, but none of them were willing to speak out, even though some of them had suffered vaccine harms themselves. I mean, really severe vaccine harms, like heart attacks.
Yes.
They wouldn't speak out. They admitted to me that they'd had a heart attack after the vaccine. Others told me that their very close relatives were paralysed with Guillain-Barré syndrome after the vaccines. None of them would speak out.
Wow. What are they afraid of, Andrew?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them.
Or who are they afraid of?
You'd have to ask them. I mean, perhaps when they were offered the bribe, perhaps they took it. In which case, then they've got the compromat on them. I don't know. They're either threatening them or blackmailing them, aren't they? The punishment that was meted out to me for daring to go against the parliamentary line and speak out about my concerns about the safety and efficacy of the vaccines 3 years ago. I mean, they destroyed me politically, reputationally, financially, and half of that was to punish me, but more than half it probably was to set an example to the other MPs, and it's worked. I mean, despite all the evidence of the vaccine harms and deaths and the cancer increases, which the reports are coming out every day, no one's asking any questions about vaccines anymore, are they? They daren't, because they know what will happen to them. So when you talk about fear and favour, well, they offer you bribes to shut up, and if not, they just attack you and destroy you politically, financially, reputationally. So that's the fear. So no one's speaking in the House of Commons without fear or favour.
So who does the MPs represent?
Well, I was representing North West Leicestershire for 14 years, and that was my home, with the people I went to school with, and my old school teachers, and where my business was, and that was what I thought. I was the servant of the people of North West Leicestershire. I mean, I think I went down to Parliament to represent North West Leicestershire and try and make my area and the country better.
Yeah.
Well, what you've actually got now, and bear in mind that MPs have had their job description changed post the last election, so it says they no longer have to represent the people.
You're not serious.
I am serious. So what you've actually got now, instead of someone to represent you as your MP in Parliament, you've actually got a representative of the party who won in that area, representing that party in your constituency. That's what you've got.
My word. And here
So
I thought
there's no semblance
made
of democracy or accountability. And
Yeah.
that's how you end up with all these things that nobody wants to talk about, whether it's the WHO, the net zero hoax, the vaccine harms, the war in Ukraine, the truth about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've got a very tame parliament that, and also what I learned was that, the political game, you win the political game and get up the greasy pole, it's by doing what's good for your party, not doing what's good for your electorate. And that's a major breach of trust.
My gosh, Andrew, you know what? I've been saying that for a long time, obviously in relation to South African politics, that from what I've observed, it appears that the moment members get into parliament, that they're more representative of political party objectives based on a mandate and sometimes other issues which were not part of the mandate that they offered the people that they said they were going to do. Because
MPs don't really have any say in the manifesto. So every election I stood in, I was selected as the candidate for that party, the Conservative Party, and the manifesto came out 2-3 weeks after the election campaign had started. Well, what say has any candidate? They've got no say whatsoever.
and where does it emanate from?
I'm afraid our politics around the world, and we will say in UK that African politics is corrupt. I can assure you, we are the most corrupt country in the world. We're just very, very good at hiding it.
Andrew, you confirm a lot of doubts in
And that's how we can end up, acquiescing to give away sovereignty and power to supranational bodies like the World Health Organization, which has been taken over by big money. A major dereliction of any duty of any elected politician. I mean, I think I said, I'll send you the speech I gave probably 2.5-3 years ago in the European Parliament, and I said in that speech that any elected representative who was willing to give away the people's sovereignty, which is not theirs to give away, didn't deserve a seat in any elected assembly, because it's a major betrayal. And we have it in our parliament in the UK just by turning a blind eye. So as I said, the only debates we had about two enormously powerful instruments, the World Health Organization's Pandemic Preparedness Treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations, which are equally damaging and very much need to be seen in parallel with the treaty. The only way you get that through is no one talks about it. It would be. I compared it to our membership of the European Union. I don't know if you were for or against that.
I was just about to ask you.
I said that. If these two treaties, two instruments come into force on the World Health Organization, it would make our membership of the European Union look like a democratic nirvana compared to autocratic control by an unelected, unaccountable, non-tax-paying, immune from prosecution due to diplomatic immunity, Director General of the World Health Organization.
What is their authority? Who gives the World Health Organization their mandate and their authority? Who exactly?
Well, the World Health Assembly, which has got delegates from every country. And I think there's only 2 countries who aren't members of the World Health Assembly, and I think that's the Vatican, the Holy See, and Liechtenstein. But they're associated members. So it's basically the whole of the UN. I mean, the World Health Organization is an offshoot, a sub-department of the United Nations. And I'm afraid, the United Nations has moved a long way away from its initial goals when it was set up after the Second World War to try and create peace around the world. I mean, let's face it, they have not really been very successful, have they?
When we look at the foreseeable impact of the international health regulations on the rights of the individual, how is that not contradicting of the United Nations Declaration on
But
Human
again,
Rights.
we had a debate in Westminster Hall on, I think it was the international health regulations, and in that speech I went through every article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that treaty just drove a coach and horses through.
What was the response you got to that delivery?
There was no one sitting near me. You can look in there. It was a very sparsely attended debate, and it got no media coverage whatsoever. And so the only debates we ever had in Parliament were due to public demand. They were public petition debates that got over 100,000 signatures. Otherwise, there would have been no debate whatsoever on instruments that would dramatically affect the relationship between the average citizen and the state of every member country of the World Health Organization, which is sort of 99% of the world. I spent a lot of time with Dr. David Bell, who used to work for the UN, and we had a lot of Zoom meetings with African politicians, senators, MPs, and representatives, but trying to get them to persuade them to go back to their own elected assemblies and say, object to all of this. But one of the problems is, and I did point this out in one of my speeches in Parliament about these instruments as well, is that a lot of supranational bodies such as the World Bank and the IMF, they were very much behind all these instruments. And so, countries in Africa who were perhaps indebted to these organizations would come under tremendous pressure, economic pressure, to agree. And so that it stood for, the wealthier countries to stand up to those organizations and stand up for democracy around the world. But unfortunately, my pleas fell on deaf ears.
So people are properly misled, uninformed.
Well, they're not even told about it. There was very little about it in the newspapers. For, say, these two instruments would have an unbelievable effect. Of course, it's not felt until the moment the unelected, unaccountable, non-tax-paying, immune from prosecution Director General of the Institute of the World Health Organization declares a public health emergency of international concern and takes all the powers away from our sovereign parliaments, or from our parliaments. And he has the ability to call that emergency and take those powers worldwide. And do you think, not only that, he has the ability to decide when the emergency is over, and he gives the powers back.
That's extraordinary.
It's such a concentration of powers in one individual who's not accountable to anybody in any sense whatsoever. All employees of the United Nations, which I say the World Health Organization is a sub-part of, they all enjoy the privileges of not paying tax, even local taxes anywhere in the world, and they all have immunity from prosecution. I often wonder, and perhaps you can enlighten me, how come all these organizations doing great works for humanity, apparently, they all need to have immunity from prosecution? Why is that? If you're doing good works, why do you need to have immunity from prosecution? I would suggest it's because you're not doing good works.
It's the same as to not make any inquiries into the safety and effectiveness of a particular product.
Of the fantastic COVID-19 vaccines, which have saved millions and millions of people, but we're not willing to show you the evidence or examine it.
Is that democracy?
We haven't had democracy in this country for a very long time.
Is the World Health Organization or the United Nations democratic in its functioning?
Is the opposite of tyranny as far as I'm concerned, but tyranny is power without accountability, and that's what they've got.
Yeah.
Now, we do have delegates who go to the World Health Assembly supposedly to represent the UK. The UK government won't even tell us the names of the representatives voting on our behalf.
No way.
They won't give the names of any of the representatives.
And let alone the actual mandate they were given in terms of voting for any item on the agenda?
No, we're not seeing it. So they refuse to disclose the names of the people. And when they're filming the World Health Assembly, no one's named. It's just the delegate from UK or the delegate from Ireland or the delegate from Sweden. They don't name them.
So those recordings are not available to the public either?
Oh, they are, yes, but there's no names. So I mean, I've now got still shots of our representatives at the last meeting, and I'm trying to find out the names of the people who were supposedly representing us, so that people might be able to lobby them with their views.
Wow.
I mean, where are they getting the public's views from? Who are they canvassing, or are they're just being told by the government? And as we know, the government currently has probably got about 13% of the public supporting it, if that, and it's falling.
Talking about the government, the cabinet, I saw a clip from Dominic Cummings explaining how the briefings actually work. That was shocking.
It's a pantomime. I said this in the Chamber of the House of Commons several years ago, that it's just a pantomime. And this right-left business, I mean, that is the illusion of choice. It is the uniparty system, and Reform are in the uniparty as well. They are the successor. They're the agreed successor to Labour. They will be just the same. It isn't about right and left anymore. It's about right and wrong. It's about the authoritarian future they've decided that mankind has got, or some sort of freedom, as far as I'm concerned. And the same thing's happening around the world. It's happening in South Africa. It's happening across Europe. It's happening.
I see Australia
across the Anglosphere. We are being hammered at the moment, and governments are in lockstep. I mean, if we go back to the pandemic, our government in the UK had got a finely honed pandemic response document strategy, which had taken decades to create and has improved. And when the pandemic did come along, supposedly the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the government put that document in the bin and just went with the World Health Organization's lockdowns, mandates, masking, social distancing, and in part mandatory vaccination with experimental gene therapies.
Was that under the leadership
and
of
so
Matt?
and so did nearly every government in the world. And of course there were 4 African leaders who said they weren't getting involved in any of this, and Tanzania was one of them. And every one of those African leaders was either assassinated or had a coup against them within months. They were removed. And then you've got in Slovakia, Robert Fico was elected prime minister after the pandemic. He announced that there were going to be a full investigation into all the corruption that went on during the pandemic, and a full investigation into the safety and efficacy of the vaccines. And he announced that he was not going to get involved in signing up to WHO pandemic treaties and amendments to the international health regulations. Within a couple of weeks, he had an assassination attempt. He was shot 4 times. He was very lucky to survive.
That is shocking.
Well, you can Google it. It's all there.
So Matt obviously threw into the bin the UK's already
pandemic response
hand
documents, plan,
and he just ran with the
which was, I believe, to keep the vulnerable, let the society function and shield the vulnerable.
Would you want to talk a little bit about what Matt presided over, especially that of the morphine-midazolam combination that was issued for administration in the care homes?
I mean, I've been working on this for years, and give them their due. A few of my colleagues, a handful, did say some things about concerns about the vaccines, but I was the only MP who stood up and said and raised concerns about the NICE protocols that were used during the pandemic. I mean, if you look at it, basically, if you were ill and suspected of having COVID-19, there were only 2 protocols. You were either put on a ventilator in hospital, which you've got an 85% chance of dying, or if you weren't considered strong enough for that, you were put on end-of-life care, which was midazolam and morphine, which are both respiratory suppressants, and together are an even more potent respiratory suppressant. And, I'd have to ask, what sensible person would give a respiratory suppressant to someone that's suspected of having a respiratory infection, which is making it difficult for them to breathe. But of course, that the use of midazolam and morphine will result in death, respiratory failure through suppression. And of course, the symptoms of that death will be exactly the same as COVID-19. And COVID-19 was put down on their death certificates.
Yeah.
Just like the people who died on ventilators. And I uncovered through some scientists who I was working with, they told me that, and the public probably don't realise this, the average time from diagnosis with COVID-19 to death was 18.3 days in the UK. All viral infections burn out after 7 days. Those people didn't die of COVID-19. They couldn't have done. They died of bacterial pneumonia, and they weren't treated as they normally would have been with antibiotics, which would have saved most of them.
The use of ivermectin here in the UK?
Well, it was vilified, wasn't it? And hydroxychloroquine.
Yes.
Very early in the pandemic, I mean, I think February 2020, I was sent a scientific paper which indicated that hydroxychloroquine had considerable efficacy for the treatment of coronavirus infections. It was a good paper. Yeah. And I sent that to the government and said, look, this needs to be looked at. Well, of course, what Chris Whitty did was authorise a trial where people got 10 and 12 times the dose of hydroxychloroquine and they died. It was giving them 12 times. They killed dozens and dozens of people. They were trialling hydroxychloroquine on it, lethal doses, and then said, oh, it's rubbish. I also sent it to Jeremy Hunt, who was, he'd been Health Secretary for 7 years. He was chair of the Health Select Committee in 2020.
Yeah. And
after 7 days, I haven't heard anything back. So I rang him on his mobile, and this is Jeremy Hunt.
Yeah.
And I said, hi, Jeremy, just wanted to check, have you had a chance to read that paper I sent you about the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine for coronaviruses? And he said to me, Andrew, please don't send me scientific papers. I don't understand them and I don't know how to read them.
This is the Health Secretary.
This is the man who had been the Health Secretary for 7 years and was chair of the Health Select Committee. And,
wow.
And then he put the phone down on me.
That's it?
That was it. And I thought, well, he's done all that and he doesn't understand scientific papers. Well, I mean, I thought that was a prerequisite. And what, he doesn't have anyone who can read it and explain it to him?
I was just going to say.
Or have the interest to find someone who could read it. I could have read it and explained it to him. I mean, these things aren't coincidences or accidents or cock-ups. So no, hydroxychloroquine was destroyed by massively overdosing the trial and killing people. And as far as ivermectin goes, I think Whitty wrote a paper about all the efficacy of that at Oxford University, probably about 15 years ago. So he knew how good ivermectin was.
So the trial was designed.
A good friend of mine is Dr. Pierre Corey, who wrote the book, The War on Ivermectin.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a good guy. He came over and spoke in England for me. He came and addressed the MPs with me in Parliament about all of this.
How many of them attended?
22, and that was about 22 out of 650. But that was sabotaged by the establishment. So the room was moved at the last minute to try and make sure we didn't have anybody go into the right room. We were told that it was needed for a committee, and we sent people to that room, and it was never occupied. They just moved us on purpose at the last minute to make sure, because obviously we had to send people to the room that we'd told everyone we were going to be in to make sure people weren't hanging about there. But it was never occupied. They just moved us, and we had presentations. I had Pierre Corey, Angus Dalgleish was there.
Yes.
Dr. Ryan from America, the pathologist.
Yes. I
had Steve Kirsch, the analyst, there. We had video presentations from Mike Yeardon and Peter McCullough, but they sabotaged the AV, so the TVs in Parliament weren't synced. I asked them to sync the TVs so that everyone in the room could see it. Also, they have no buttons on them, and what we found out the engineers had done is they turned the sound down to nothing on the remotes, and they took all the remotes with them, so we couldn't play the videos. And they put security on the door, checking the names of everybody who entered to intimidate. This never happened at a meeting. And I said, like, there might be trouble. And we just had a load of scientists. Might be trouble. I mean, it's not funny, really. If you put it in a book, no one would believe you. But that's exactly what happened. I mean, I just got the impression they really didn't want us having that meeting. So, you know, whenever anyone doesn't want to talk about something, it's normally because it's very sensitive. Whenever anyone tells you the science is settled, well, I mean, that's a red flag to start with, because it doesn't work that way, does it?
That's not science.
The issue has been settled. I'm not talking about it. We've settled that. We've had that discussion. Well, I mean, that's just a red flag that they've got no arguments, and they're particularly vulnerable. Before I was thrown out of the Conservative Party for speaking out on the vaccines, which I spoke out vocally when the government were being lobbied by the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency to extend the COVID vaccines down to babies of 6 months, which they did in most of the world. And despite the fact that on the 13th of December I was cancelled when I stood up in Parliament and said this wasn't right, and there were questions around the safety and efficacy, and despite the government saying I was talking rubbish, they never did authorise those vaccines for those children in this country. So that was good. And a few weeks later, I had a meeting with the party grandee and went through everything: NG163, the midazolam and morphine, the vaccines. And then I was just blatantly told, this is exactly verbatim what I was told at the end of the meeting, after an hour and a half of me presenting my concerns. Andrew, there's currently no political appetite for your views on the vaccines. There may be in 20 years' time, and you're probably going to be proven right then. But in the meantime, you need to bear in mind that you're taking on the most powerful vested interest in the world, with all the personal risk for you that will entail if you continue.
Do you mind me asking who said that to you?
It was Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I knew that his sister, Annunciata, had to go to hospital after 2 Pfizer jabs with chest pains. And I didn't tell him that. He knew everything.
What's Jacob's...
That's the level of intimidation. I got up and said, I think this meeting's over. I'm out of here. I'm not having this. Didn't go into Parliament to see children killed and injured if I could do anything about it. But they were all happy for that to happen, and they knew. And that's when I really lost faith in the whole system. When they won't stand up to save small children's lives from injury and death, we're not going to stand up and stop the World Health Organization, because also then, you see, it gets them all off the hook and say, well, the WHO, they've declared a pandemic, the WHO are in charge, it's not our decision that you've got to have this dangerous medication, and it's almost, we're not responsible. But they are responsible because they're letting this organisation take over.
Yes. So how does that
this
impact...
power, and they're negligent in their duty of care to protect the interest of the British people.
Yeah, so what about the British individual, the person, your right to bodily and psychological integrity? How do you foresee that going to be?
The Nuremberg Code and the Helsinki Treaty, they're completely in breach of that. But what
surely they would
governments have sought to do is we have human rights under the Unilateral Declaration, the Helsinki Agreement, Nuremberg Code. They're trying to replace in the human mind these inalienable rights with privileges, because privileges can be removed if if you're on the naughty step. If you don't behave how the government wants, your privileges will be taken away. And that's why they want digital ID, and that's why they want following the financial crash which is going to come next year, or a war with Russia, a big war. That's the only thing that their alternatives. Then they'll bring in the digital ID, and a war would bring in digital, because we'd have to have ID cards if the war came, wouldn't we? That's happened before, so they bring that in. And then once you couple the central bank digital currency with the digital ID, you don't need to build walls around 15-minute cities, because they can program your bank card so it doesn't work 15 minutes away from your home. And then you can't go anywhere, can you?
Exactly.
And if you're not a good boy or girl, We just, we take fines straight from your bank account. Well, they can put money into the economy then and say, well, if you don't spend it in a fortnight, it disappears. It's programmable. So they've got complete control of the economy. You can make you spend, make you save, make you not spend, turn it on, turn it off. You're just a marionette dancing as they pull your strings. I said to people, if you don't say no to digital ID, you'll never be able to say no to the government again.
That is so true. Probably the most relevant point in this day and age.
And bear in mind, Carl, that, I spoke out in 13th of December 2022. That moment I was cancelled. I spent my last 20 months in Parliament eating all my meals on my own because nobody wanted to talk to me. Now, in any other workplace, that would be seen as bullying and coercion, wouldn't it? Not in Parliament.
You've just been sidelined just like that.
Yes, but thankfully there are about 4,000 real people who work in Parliament. They're the cooks and the cleaners and the waiters and the security guards and the clerks. And when there was no one in the corridor, they were very appreciative for what I was doing. And the number of nights when one of the cleaning ladies, as I was walking out of Parliament, mopping the corridors, would have a look up and down, see there's no one in the corridor, and then grab me and say, we're all praying for you, Andrew, keep going. Unbelievable.
Oh, that gives me goosebumps to hear that.
Well, I mean, he had to be there. It was unbelievable. And if anyone had seen that lady saying that to me, I mean, she would have faced disciplinary action and probably dismissal from her job. But she said, we're all praying for you, keep going.
How did you manage through all of that, being sidelined on your own?
And catcalls every time I stood up in the chamber to speak and ask questions. I just had catcalls from, well, there aren't many scientists. My degree is in biological sciences with biochemistry, specialising in genetics and virology and behaviour. So, I mean, I had the perfect match for the pandemic, didn't I?
What were they calling you? What were they saying?
Tinfoil hatter, conspiracy theorist. Well,
How did that make you feel, Andrew? Don't mind me asking.
Well, it was this. I knew what was going to happen every time I went in there. I knew what I was going to say. I knew what the response would be. I don't know. The fact is that the public were very much with me as well. So when I was cancelled from the media and by my colleagues, I had hundreds of thousands of emails from all over the world from people who believed in what I was saying. People often who were vaccine harmed themselves. Or vaccine bereaved, they'd lost relatives. And I don't know, there was a lot of bullying going on, and it was pretty obvious, the bullying and intimidation. And I don't think British people, they just don't like that. They don't like, and you've got to ask, if I was talking rubbish, why didn't they just debate me and make me look stupid instead of running away and just catcalling? And also I'd point out that the procedure in the House of Commons is, if you state something that's not correct, any member can write to the Speaker and say, Andrew Bridgen said this and it's not correct. He's got to go, and then you have to go back to the chamber at the first opportunity and put the record straight. All the speeches I gave, whether it was about the WHO, the vaccines, the excess deaths, I was never asked to go back and correct the record. That tells you everything you need to know, doesn't it? It was truth.
Exactly.
They couldn't, even by analysing over the Hansard record afterwards, they couldn't find it. All those speeches were checked by top scientists. And I knew I had to get all the figures right.
There's no complaints against any of the statements?
Never any complaint against anything I said. Never any question not even a demand that I went back and put the record straight. That's because everything I said was the truth. The unpalatable truth.
What does that mean for your and my bodily integrity? I know you said rights versus privileges. I mean, the privileges, if you're threatening someone with the privileges, that obviously amounts to a form of coercion.
Coercion, yes. Well, that's right. Well, they tried to bring in the vaccine passports, didn't they, which would have been the precursor to the digital ID. They tried to bring that in, but there was pushback from the public. I mean, clearly if you had a digital ID, then that would be linked to your health care. Then they've already got it ready for the next I mean, they talk about the next pandemic, don't they? It's an absolute certainty.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how everybody knew there was going to be a pandemic in 2019, 2020, didn't they?
Yes.
They've been saying it for years. There's definitely going to be a pandemic in the next couple of years.
Especially when
Well,
products
if you're culturing it in a lab and you're going to release it, you can be fairly sure that there is going to be a pandemic, yes. But I have got some hope. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is a very good man, doing great work in America. And when I was thrown out of the Conservative Party after 12 years in Parliament and 20 years a member, not one of my colleagues, who I thought my friends, even contacted me to say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear what's happened to you," or anything. Nobody contacted me, but I did get a phone call from a US presidential candidate, and it was Robert Kennedy Jr. And he said that I'll back you, and what they've done to you is disgraceful, and you'll be proven right. And I'm hoping that in the next few months he's going to release the data not only on the childhood schedule in America and the harm that I believe that's doing, but also where the COVID-19 vaccines and their lack of safety and efficacy. And that's why he's getting so much flack himself now. I mean, you only get attacked in the media and from your colleagues. You get the heaviest flack when you're right over the target, don't you?
Exactly.
That's when they fire at you the most, when you're over the target. So we shouldn't be too saddened by that.
Your constituents, what's the response from them?
Well, I'd gone 4 election cycles, and I'd always increased my majority. We'd taken, with the help of my councillors, we got control in 2007 of the council. I won the election in 2010. We'd moved North West Leicestershire, which was the poorest constituency in Leicestershire. Taken us 12 years, we'd moved it to the richest. So they were fairly happy. 1.2 jobs in the constituency for everyone of working age, the highest economic growth in the country, and the happiest place to live in the Midlands before the 2019 election, at which that election I got 63% of all the votes. And I'd led the Leave campaign for the East Midlands, and 61% of my electorate had voted with me against the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, who are all for Remain. They voted with me to leave. And I'm afraid there was a lot of shenanigans around the election last year in July. A lot of, for some reason, it took hours and hours to bring the ballot boxes in this time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And they announced that as the polls closed, that it was going to take a long time tonight to bring the ballot boxes. Well, in the boundary changes, my seat had actually got a little bit smaller, not bigger. And we normally got the ballot boxes all in 35 minutes. And it took hours. And apparently, my vote went down from 63% to 3%. But the mysterious thing is, every time I go outside the house, and I still live in North West Leicestershire, half the people I meet tell me they voted for me.
Half the people. Which
and
exceeds 3%.
Also, you know the Ipsos Mori poll of the exit poll on polling day?
No, I don't know.
Well, a firm called Ipsos Mori, they poll on polling day, so that they know basically how everyone's voted. So they announce that at 10 o'clock as soon as the polls close. They announce who's won, effectively, what they believe. And what happens is that they put people outside a polling station in every constituency, and they ask every 4th person that comes out how they voted. They write it all down and then keep it confidential, but send it off to London, and then they know. Well, in North West Leicestershire, they decided to cancel the exit poll 2 weeks before the election. And I put that to you, that is because they knew that otherwise the exit polling wouldn't have matched up to the votes in the ballot box. It was huge election fraud. And thinking back in Parliament, we had lots of debates about voter fraud, where people might vote twice, or take someone else's identity, or someone might vote who wasn't eligible to vote. We never had any debates or discussions around election fraud, where a whole election is rigged.
Is there any investigation into that
No, you have
dramatic
21
drop.
days to raise it. You have 21 days, and it has to go to the Electoral Commission within 21 days. But what I will tell you is that there was a lot of people, I believe, involved in that election fraud. They didn't want to do that. They put a lot of pressure on me not to stand because they didn't want to have to fix the election, but they were never going to let me back into Parliament.
Who
For
put the
obvious
pressure on
reasons.
you? Your party?
Oh, financial pressure. They've taken all my assets away from me, and they've taken my business away from me, even taken my
Sorry
private
to hear that.
pension away from me. I had a private pension of some millions of pounds that I'd paid up before I became an MP, and I have no access to that either. They've really stitched me up, and they didn't want to have to do it. It would have been somewhere probably between a dozen and 20 people involved in that fraud. Well, there's no statute of limitations on election fraud, and one day someone's going to spill the beans, aren't they? And those people who partook in that criminal action against, it wasn't just against me, it was against the people in North West Leicestershire. They stole their votes.
Yes.
They're going to be looking over their shoulder for the rest of their lives, aren't they? So they only want one person to blow the whistle, and it will happen. How they did it.
It's mind-blowing to hear it firsthand. I know a lot of the things that we can see, we can reduce or draw inferences on. It's so obvious, but then you get called, oh, you're conspiracy theorist and all of this.
Well, that was a phrase invented by the CIA to, in the wake of the JFK assassination, to shut down any questioning of the narrative. Well, I mean, you talk about bodily autonomy and deciding what you put in your body, and what were you told during the pandemic? Just trust the science. Trust the science. Don't question. Just take the vaccine.
Wow.
You know, you've seen the papers that are coming out now. The one in Japan, 22 million. I mean, these are large studies. 22 million.
I saw that one.
Yeah, massive increase in cancer post the boosters. And there was a paper came out from Italy last week. 30 to 60% increase in cancer only in the vaccinated population. And of course, the Office of National Statistics, who we rely on in the UK, I mean, when the excess deaths started getting going after the pandemic, they stopped producing deaths for vaccinated and unvaccinated populations. No explanation. What I also can tell you is that most people don't know, the Office of National Statistics had its own premises and operated from its own premises in London. They were shut down in 2022. They're now in an office inside the Home Office.
I had no idea.
No, well, they're not going to publicise it, but that's a fact. They're in Marsham Street, inside the Home Office, where they can be kept an eye on.
So how reliable can a
And of course, when I started
information-
talking about excess deaths, they then rebased the expected number of deaths to wipe out 2/3 of the excess deaths. So suddenly, after using a formula for excess deaths or expected deaths, and what was surplus to that was excess, for decades, they just rebased it and increased the expected deaths to wipe out most of the excess deaths. Well, I mean, anyone can do that, can't they?
So what's the value of any freedom of information request?
There's no value to the data coming out of the Office of... Why have they stopped giving us the data of deaths weekly by vaccine status? Because if they did, it would expose the truth, wouldn't it? What have they got to hide? As we said before, the truth doesn't need protecting. There's only one thing that needs to be protected, and that's lies. And they've told a lot of lies to the public, and it's damaged the public.
What, in your view, unless you know, is the British Broadcasting Corporation having to be the primary investigator, reporter? Are they not interested in this?
Media licenses, they were auctioned off from the early 90s. Under John Major, the requirement for, say, ITV, Channel 4, Sky to do investigative journalism was dropped in the 90s. So then they're not obliged to do any investigations. What I would say is that in my time in Parliament, I saw the level of number of investigative journalists drop enormously. They're quite expensive. They don't produce a story every week. It's quite, it's quite a lot of work, probably months of work sometimes, to get to the truth and to a point where you could actually print the story and expose what's been going on. And they just don't exist anymore. Those journalists don't really exist anymore.
So hence it's just down to what we call independent journalism, citizen
Yes.
journalists.
Yes.
Your reach.
They're going to be on social media, and they'll be seen as conspiracy theorists. Yeah.
Despite even if you
I mean,
present
Malcolm X is, one of the best quotes I've heard from him was that he said that the media have got the power in the world because they have the power to make the guilty innocent and the innocent guilty. And
yes.
they do. They do. They just paint the narrative.
So you remain hopeful despite the doubt that one can have in the quality of freedom of information you get. And if you went to present that as a citizen journalist, what's the chances of you reaching
No chance.
the
No
masses?
chance. No chance. Our institutional barrels, not every apple in the barrel is rotten, but all the apples at the top of all the barrels are rotten. That's in politics, the media, the judiciary, the police, and corporations. And any apple that wants to rise to the top has to rot, has to be willing to rot. That's why I was offered the bribe. I wouldn't take it. Now, so it's self-perpetuating situation of corruption, because if you're the corrupt head of any organization, I mean, Connor, when you come to retire or step down or move away, you've got to make sure that the person that takes over from you is at least as corrupt as you, or it's all going to come out, isn't it? So it's self-perpetuating, and we've been in this situation for a long time. So I'm afraid we've got to, the current political system does not work for the people. It's got us into this mess. It's never going to get us out of it. And anybody who wants to play in that game is part of the game. We need a whole new system, and we need the tops taking off all of our institutional barrels because they're rotten.
That leads me to the question of, would you think about, or how would, or do you think impact what Jeremy Corbyn is trying to do and Sultana?
Jeremy, I think Jeremy's done a deal with the globalists to be tolerated. If you look at, they arrange all the elections. They like to know where, they hate democracy. We weren't supposed to vote to leave the European Union. Donald Trump wasn't supposed to win in 2016. They're not taking those chances again. So Nigel Farage, I think, was coerced into coming back into politics because the globalists knew that Tice was not good enough to take enough votes off the Tories to give Labour a massive majority with 30% support in the country. So that was engineered. Now they want Nigel Farage to be the next Prime Minister. So of course they're going to encourage another left of centre party to split the left of centre vote to give more of a chance for Farage to be the Prime Minister with a big majority, because he's going to betray the people just like Keir Starmer has, and just like Rishi Sunak did before him. And of course, when the public have been betrayed by Labour, the Conservatives, and Reform, when they say we're going to have one world government, and people will say, well, we've tried everybody and they're rubbish, so we'll accept that we might as well have a one world. Yeah. And that's the game they're going to play, and that's the game they are playing.
Manufactured structure to
problem solution.
Your defense,
problem solution. You've tried everybody. They're all rubbish. They all make you promises which they're never going to keep, and they all fill their boots. They're all corrupt. So you might as well have a one world government. And what you've got with the WHO is a one world government, isn't it? Under a dictatorship. You can understand the globalists. I mean, they're controlling the world, and it must be very inconvenient for them. They have to bribe the government to do what they want, and then that's going to make the government unpopular. So they've got to bribe the opposition as well, so that they've got them in the wings ready to take over. Whereas, I mean, if you have a one world government, you've only got to bribe one person, haven't you? Isn't it much more efficient for them? And you don't have to have, with the WHO, you don't really have to have elections, do you? Don't have that inconvenience. So, I mean, it's basically job sorted, and the people are just treated very little better than cattle.
I could hear Nigel's tiptoeing on the issue of digital ID.
He can't oppose it because his masters want it. His masters want it. Of course, he's never said anything about it. When I'd been around everybody in Parliament, I mean, I went to the Labour Party. I was that desperate. I went to the Labour Party and said, help me. I've got to stop them jabbing the babies. And Labour said to me, we're not going against Big Pharma, Andrew. And then I went to see Nigel Farage in January 23. Had a meeting with him and Aaron Banks for several hours in a pub. Went through everything I'd been through with everyone else about the vaccines and NG163. And at the end, I said to Nigel, will you help me? And, so you'll be on the right side of history. We're doing good stuff. And he said, Andrew, I'm not going to speak about the vaccines. And if you know what's good for you, you won't either. He knew. And that's not leadership, is it? That's another word. Another word. Yeah. And he hates the fact that that's the truth. But it is. That's the truth. I also told him about 2 years ago about the Defence and Securities Union, which I knew the Conservatives and Labour wanted to sign up to, which will give away control of our armed forces, MI6, MI5, GCHQ, our nuclear deterrent, and our local police force to the European Union. And we're supposed to have left. And Starmer signed us into that process this summer. And Nigel Farage told me 2 years ago, we're done with Brexit's done, Andrew. We're not talking about that anymore.
Really?
And he didn't speak out against he actually went on holiday that week from Parliament. So he wasn't there. He wasn't there for the vote on. I mean, I'll tell you something shocking. I actually do have friends in the Labour Party, MPs who I personally got on with very well, not politically, but personally. And that wouldn't have stopped me hammering them in the chamber or them trying to hammer me. But on a personal level, I thought they were all right. And one of them has been ringing me, and he's been in Parliament for 15. He's a 5-term MP. And I said to him that you always wanted to be on the government benches. Now you're on after 14 years. You've been telling me you wanted to be in power. How is it? He says, terrible. He said, we're all out at the next election. We already know we're finished. The Labour Party's finished at the next election. And I said, well, how's it going with the votes and everything? I said, did you vote for that appalling legalization of abortion, decriminalization of abortion up to birth? Which I said, you wouldn't get 2 or 3% of the public would be in favour of that. But it flew through Parliament. I said, you didn't vote for that, did you? He said, I don't know, Andrew. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, it's that bad that I'm no longer looking at the order paper of what we're voting for. I sit in the tea room. When the bell rings, I go in, I vote where the Labour whips are. They tell me which way to vote. He said, because if I don't know what I'm voting for, I can sleep rather better at night. That's how bad it's gotten. He's not a new MP. He's been elected 5 times. Now that is not democracy, is it?
Exactly.
All the ills that have been unleashed upon the world and our country, which are a myriad. If you're expecting elected MPs to solve it, it's not coming from there, I'm afraid.
No.
That's gone.
No.
It's got to come from the ground up.
You're telling me, Andrew, it's a straight from the book of Dr. Naomi Wolf. Everything that's happened and happening to you.
But it's the same to everybody who's spoken out. I saw doctors who've been dismissed from you've left as a nurse. Lots of nurses and midwives have left. Good people who care about the patients and informed consent. You've got lawyers who've spoken out about the human rights, and they've lost their licenses.
Yeah.
My barrister, who is very big on this, he's got 4 complaints against him from the Bar Standards Board to try and take him off the bar. They're all completely spurious, and he's now taking action against them, and that's going to be fascinating. And I'm going to give evidence for him. And and the moment I spoke out about vaccines, I'd gone 12 years with no problem with parliamentary standards. I had back-to-back investigations into me for the last 2 years I was an MP, and all the smears in the newspapers. It was rubbish, all created rubbish. One thing that the World Economic Forum had done is they've taken control of all the regulators, professional regulators, because they've got huge power to dismiss people and take their livelihood off them, and then people get threatened. So they created something called the Regulators Pioneer Fund, and they bought their way into the GMC and the SRA and the Civil Aviation Authority. And of course, in Parliament, we have the Parliamentary Standards, Independent Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. And I can assure you they're neither independent. There's no way they're independent. And we're going to expose them for the, I mean, then you know, if MPs who ask difficult questions suddenly find they're always under investigation by standards, you know, you get the impression. And doctors who ask questions about the vaccines, they were dismissed, weren't they? They lost their, the GMC had them in on spurious grounds, and I think there's about 10 or 20 doctors I know who have lost their licenses or handed them in because they knew they were going through a process which was going to be created to make sure they were destroyed professionally. I mean, quite honestly, you know, those are the people we need running the health service, aren't they? You know, Norman Fenton, probably one of the greatest statisticians we had in the country, he was chair of the Turing Group at St Mary's University. He merely crunched the numbers on the COVID deaths and came to conclusions about how unlikely it was that it wasn't the vaccine that was killing people. All he's doing is analysing the numbers. He was forced to retire. They got it so his students. He's saying we will not be taught by an anti-vaxxer. He wasn't an anti-vaxxer. He was just analysing the numbers. They could have been any numbers. He was just analysing the numbers.
It's the labeling.
And they forced him to retire. Well, he should be running that university. He's a man of integrity. We're in the inverted world where people who stand up and tell the truth are attacked, cancelled, and destroyed, and people who are willing to tell lies and to hurt people knowingly are promoted. That is not a sustainable situation for humanity to continue.
Is this a similar situation with a lawyer in Netherlands being arrested for?
But no charges, been arrested and put in solitary confinement, yes, for bringing a legal case against Bill Gates, Albert Bourla, Mark Rutte, who's now running NATO but was head of the Netherlands, and others. And that judge wouldn't let all the expert witnesses give their evidence.
The justice system is not really for
Hasn't got much justice, no.
It's very important for people to hear it from someone like yourself who's been in the
belly of the beast.
That when people say the judiciary or the justice system is compromised, you can use a much stronger word to say that it's...
Okay, I'll give you an example. My barrister and I are working on a situation now which we've got the evidence that when you go to appeal, first of all, you have to ask the High Court judge for permission to appeal who's just found against you.
Yeah.
They seldom do. Then you have to apply to the Court of Appeal. And an appeal court judge has to judge whether it's got any chance of success and whether it should be heard at an appeal hearing.
Right.
What we found evidence was that named High Court judge had actually written the appeal court judge's judgment that was in his name. And then we challenged them and they wouldn't answer the question. So we challenged the appeal court judge to, and I wrote him a letter and said, could you please answer these 3 questions, very straightforward questions. Is the judgment in this case, on this date, it's got your name at the bottom of it, did you write it? You'd think that was an easy question to answer, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. The second question is, if you didn't write it, can you tell us who did write it? And 3, if you claim you did write it, and bear in mind, I think it was a 20-paragraph judgment, can you explain why it was on your computer according to the metadata for less than 60 seconds? And his solicitor came back and said, Lord Justice will not be answering these questions.
Wow.
We only need, actually, a non-corrupt appeal court system, and it can sort out all the corruption further down. And not all the judges are corrupt, but there's no transparency over which judge you get. So the sensitive cases, I think they get the judges that the government want or the establishment want to come to the right decision. That's the problem. There's no transparency over which judge gets which case. And there's almost no redress for judicial corruption. Tony Blair changed the rules in the noughties. So there's almost no redress against, there really isn't any redress against a judge. They've got a lot of ambit to make very weird decisions. And you see, of course, if you want to be in power forever, empower the judiciary and bring them to your political view. And if they don't even have to implement the law, they can interpret it how they want to. You're never out of power, are you?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, how did we end up
Or
that,
interpret.
you know, that we ended up that the former chairman of the Fabian Society ruled that the government were completely within their rights to, and that the migrants had more rights than British citizens. Well, I mean, he was a former chairman of the Fabian Society, which I think they've declared that 126 current Labour MPs are members of the Fabian Society, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, you've got the politicisation of the judiciary, and that's not right. So you haven't got separation of powers anymore. And whatever you say, it's actually politicians who decide. You can be completely independent as a judge, Connell, but I'm as a politician, I'm going to decide whether you get promoted or not. So you're completely independent. You come to your own decisions. You know what I mean? Well, I mean, that's not independent, is it really?
Oh,
So when I talk about our institutional barrels, this is the evidence I've got that it's all rotten.
Right.
And they've made justice so expensive that for the average person, it's only for very rich people.
Inaccessible. Yeah, it's totally inaccessible. It's
justice is completely inaccessible.
Mm.
I had to crowdfund my case against Matt Hancock. He's pulling every favour he can from the establishment, we'll see how it goes. But hopefully, at least I'll point out how corrupt the judiciary is.
When's the next date for your case?
I haven't got it. He's managed to get an appeal against his second failed strikeout, which also means that the case never moves forward. So we're 2.5 years in. We haven't got a date for a final hearing. It's costing hundreds of thousands of pounds, and he's just trying to tire me out and run my money out.
The usual.
Well, I mean, which I keep making the point that if he had a safe and good strong case, he's never actually presented a defence yet. I don't think he has one. He'd be very keen to get into court and prove that I'm wrong, and then it'd be all over, wouldn't it? He's not.
Are you allowed to just give a summary about what your case is, or you advise not to?
Yeah.
What you're allowed, what you know.
On the 11th of January 2023, I tweeted that a paper from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem by Dr. Josh Getchko, who is a sociologist, and that was indicating that the vaccine that I think it was indicating that the vaccine that was put in people's arms wasn't the same vaccine that got approval, emergency use approval. They were basically untested.
So you tweeted that,
and I tweeted it with, as a leading cardiologist has told me, the vaccine rollout, the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. And I was called an anti-Semite.
And which cardiologist said that, Andrew?
I'm not willing to disclose.
Okay.
And Hancock then asked the Prime Minister at PMQs. He called me disgusting, anti-Semitic, anti-science, anti-vax. No place in this House or in wider society.
Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree with me that the disgusting, anti-Semitic, anti-vax conspiracy theories that have been promulgated online this morning are not only deeply offensive, but anti-scientific and have no place in this House or in our wider society?
Prime Minister. Well, can I join with my right honourable friend in completely condemning those types of comments that we saw this morning in the strongest possible terms? Obviously, it is utterly unacceptable to make linkages and use language like that, and I'm determined that the scourge of anti-Semitism is eradicated. It has absolutely no place in our society, and I know that the previous few years have been challenging for the Jewish community, and I never want them to experience anything like that ever again.
Yeah.
My tweet of 11th of January was in no way anti-Semitic. Indeed, it alluded to the Holocaust being the most heinous crime against humanity in living memory. Of course, if anyone is genuinely offended by my use of such imagery, then I apologise for any offence caused. I wholeheartedly refute any suggestions that I am racist, and currently I'm speaking to a legal team who will commence action against those who've led the calls suggesting that I am.
When he has privilege in Parliament to say what he wants, and he is what he is. But then he tweeted it, and he's refused to take it down. He's admitted in proceedings that it's defamatory. He hasn't gone with the defence of truth, so basically he knows that what he said wasn't true. And he knows it's defamatory, and he's refused multiple occasions to take it down. Then he claimed that he'd done me no harm by calling me an anti-Semite. Well, I mean, being called a racist anti-Semite, I mean, there's only one thing worse than that, and that's being called a paedophile, isn't it?
Right.
And for politicians, you know, it was all repeated in the newspapers, and then I was expelled from the Conservative Party for it. So they're on dodgy ground. I also issued papers against him and Sunak for conspiracy to silence people talking about the vaccines, and cited that I believe that Mr. Sunak, through Thalim Partners in the Cayman Islands, one of his hedge funds, that he'd had 11% of the shares in Moderna, and he hadn't declared this interest to the public, and while he was Chancellor, he'd given Moderna £1 billion of taxpayers' money to build new mRNA factories at Oxford, under contracts for the next 10 years for at least 150 million doses a year. And I issued letter before action to Sunak on that. He didn't deny. He had the perfect opportunity there to say there's no truth in my financial interest. Couldn't do it. Because he has. That's how they just don't care anymore.
And that was not disclosed in his.
Well, he'll say that the Thalim Partners, and by the way, Thalim is the same name as Aleister Crowley's child sacrifice cult. Thalim means do as you will. We've had too much of people doing as they will. That's just a coincidence, by the way.
Provided you have the backing of
the World Economic Forum and Pfizer and Moderna and their shareholders and BlackRock, you're fine. And you can do what you want. Yeah. Well, I think it's about time that we're going to have a reckoning. I'm hoping that the truth will come out in America in the next couple of months about the vaccines, and that tsunami will come across the Atlantic pretty quickly and sweep away the self-serving politicians we've got in this country and in Europe and around the world, who have unfortunately betrayed the people. And all the ills that we're seeing and the way our society is slipping inexorably below the waves, none of it is cock up. It is all deliberate. And if it were if it were cock up, you couldn't do it any deliberately any better, could you, or any faster? They're destroying our society, destroying our economy, and I think they are actually pushing the people to a sort of civil unrest. So then they can have another crackdown and say we've got to have we've got all this civil unrest. We need to identify these people. So we've got to have digital ID, and we've got basically a form of lockdown martial law to get the situation back under control. And we're heading there fast. The world we're living in would have been unthinkable 5 or 6 years ago. You wouldn't believe we could possibly be in this situation, would you? But we are. And what they're trying to do is create fear in the public, because people who are scared don't think sensibly about the long-term implications of what they're allowing to happen. Create the fear and then offer you a solution. And I'd probably just end this interview by pointing out that through my research and my memory of politics, looking back with hindsight, do you remember the first thing that Tony Blair's government did in '97? It was not in their manifesto. It was unexpected, but it was something they pushed through straight away when they got into government.
Tell me.
I remember seeing the headlines and I think, why is he doing that? They took the death penalty out of the Treason Act. Why would that be your main priority when you got into government, unless you were going to perpetrate treason against the people? And I put it to you and your listeners that every Prime Minister of every colour since Tony Blair has committed treason, conspiring with powers outside of this country against the interests of the British people. In fact, it's high treason because they're paid from the public purse.
That's a bombshell.
Yeah. Well, if it's right that Rishi Sunak owned 11% controlled 11% of the Moderna shares, he bought those shares in 2016 when Moderna had 10 employees and no products, and he put $500 million into the company. How did he know? How did he know? And then he gave them £1 billion of taxpayers' money for free and contracts for 10 years. If that isn't a breach, a conflict of interest, I mean, I just don't know what is. If you can get away with that, you can get away with anything, can't you?
What's the use of the ministerial code then? Even that, it's
disgraceful. And he could, I mean, I never saw a man as happy as when he lost that election. It wasn't an election last July. It was a baton handover to for the next part of the team to carry on with it. And because Gus Starmer's got such a large majority, I mean, he's increased the pace of the infliction of the pain on the British people, hasn't he? Because he's able to. But I've got great hope. I've got a great belief in humanity, and as a behavioural scientist, a long time ago, you know, humans, we've been on this planet for a long time. We're good survivors, and we adapt. And I know that the good is going to win, because if evil were and being bad were a winning strategy, the majority of people in the world would be bad, and they're not. They're still good. So good has to be the winning strategy, isn't it, long term?
I like that.
Well, that's the science, isn't it? We've been on this planet long enough that if being evil and bad was a winning strategy, we'd all have to have adopted that by now to survive, wouldn't we? But we haven't, have we?
Because our overall innate drive is to survive.
Is to survive. And I think cooperation, helping people, working together for a common goal is it. And that's not the way the country's going at the moment. It's unnatural and it's unsustainable. And it's not the way the world's going. It's not a British problem. This is a problem around the world. The people who are against us thrive off our fear and anxiety. So we've got to try and live without fear. That doesn't help. We've got to question everything. Look in, do your own research. Don't believe what you see on the BBC. Don't believe what the politicians tell you, and make the best decisions for you and your communities. And no is a very small word. If billions of us on the planet say it at one time, it will resonate. And the people who are running us into the ground are very few, and we are very many.
Thank you so much for your time, Andrew, and for your candidness, and also giving a first-hand insight so clear into the belly of the beast. Or maybe we're just looking at one end of the barrel.
I like that analogy. You're probably right. Thank you very much for having me on.